Okay, Shannon, would you put us back on, please? Okay, Ms. McCluskey.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would call Amy Schwartz. I believe she should be in the waiting room.
I will let her in. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hello.
All right. Would you raise your right hand, please? You do swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
You can put your hand down. I want you to state your full name and then spell your last.
My name is Amy Schwartz, Schwartz.
Go ahead, Ms. McCluskey.
Thank you, Ms. Schwartz. Ms. Schwartz, could you tell the court what you do for a living?
Yeah, I have my license in professional counseling. I do infant mental health through Highfields. I also work with ages up to 17 and their families. I recently got promoted to be supervisor, so right now I oversee autism case management as well.
Great. Congratulations on that. So do you have, what is your educational or training background in your profession?
I have a master's in psychology and a second master's in professional counseling with a dual license in school counseling.
Okay. And how long have you been, you said you work with Highfields?
Yeah.
And is that the Jackson location?
Yes, it is.
Okay. How long have you been, how long have you been in this profession in general?
I have worked in counseling for almost 7 years. I have done infant mental health counseling for 4.5 years. I have been endorsed as an infant mental health counselor since 2019.
Okay. And how long have you been with Highfields?
I began with Highfields in December of 2016.
Ms. Schwartz,
4.5.
At times your voice is picking up quite well, and other times it's so faint we can barely hear you. So if I could just ask you to keep your voice up, maybe get a little closer to the microphone. Yeah. And if you could re-answer that question, because we missed part of it.
Okay. I have worked for Highfields for 4.5 years.
And how do you know the parties here today, Mr. Scott Frid and Miss Nicole Goodwin?
They were referred to infant mental health counseling through Lifeways. And my supervisor did an assessment for infant mental health. And initially they had requested autism testing, which is what they were sent for. But following the assessment, it was recommended that they do home-based counseling to determine if there was any need for autism testing or whether it was just trauma and behaviors that were causing the issue. Okay.
And when they were referred to you, is that because you have training or you're qualified to identify essentially symptoms of autism?
I don't do the testing for autism, but I can help differentiate whether there's a need for further testing based on observations in the home, interactions between the family, Ellie's behaviors, things like that.
Did you ever determine there was a need for further testing, at least during the time you were?
No, I did not. Based on the MChats that I did, it did not indicate a need for further testing, and I did not see any behaviors that would indicate autism.
Okay. When did Ellie become a client?
They completed the assessment November 18th, 2020. We opened to home-based services on December 1st, 2020.
Okay. It looks like you're referring to your notes. If that helps you recall those dates, that's okay. Okay. And how often would you see Ellie?
So with home-based counseling, it is a minimum of 1.5 hours per week and up to 3 hours if they need additional assistance. So at her age, we typically start with 1.5 hours per week. That is what we began with. I was splitting the time between Nicole's and Scott's homes. So I would try to do like a half hour with Nicole and an hour with Scott each week. But our goal was to begin splitting the time and gradually transition to having the majority of the time with Scott, as that's what the treatment goals were centered around.
Okay. And I'll get to those in just a moment, but being home-based, were you able to do actually any in-person, in-home during that time?
At the time we opened, our policy was still to do all service through telehealth. At some point, we did reopen to home-based face-to-face as an option. At that time, when we reviewed the face-to-face guidelines, Scott had chosen to continue with Zoom due to the restrictions to be in person, like use of masks, not being able to bring in toys, social distancing.
Okay. So he was offered the opportunity to come in person at some point. Is that correct?
Yes. And he did say that he wanted to switch to in-person sessions. However, after that decision was made, the family had COVID in the home. And so we were not able to do an in-person session due to the COVID guidelines and having to wait till the quarantine was up. And by the time the quarantine was over, they didn't continue services after that.
So what was the initial treatment plan for Ellie?
Get the goals here for you.
Yeah, and if you need to use your notes to refresh your memory, that's perfect.
Yeah. 1 second here. I'm just getting her goals. Apologize. Give me 1 second. I have lots of notes here.
No problem. I prefer you find the right one, so take your time.
Okay. So our initial treatment goals were to help her transition to dad's house without issue, have fun, and play with other kids while there. So the plan was to work on coping skills so that she would be able to leave for visits without distress and show comfort to see him. To learn social skills to help her to engage with others while at her dad's. To communicate her needs verbally with speech therapy. To parents learn positive parenting skills to support Ellie when she's upset and be able to identify her needs. And to learn skills to co-parent cooperatively to help her with transition between home and routines.
Okay. And how do you develop that initial treatment plan?
I had a call with both parents attending where we discussed what the concerns were and what goals that the family had for her.
Okay. So is it fair to say that treatment plan incorporates both parents' concerns and both parents' goals?
Yes, both parents were present at the treatment plan and contributed to setting the goals.
Okay. And did that treatment plan change at any time during the course of your working with Ellie?
No, it did not.
Okay. So if you were to restart services as of today, it would essentially be the same. Is that fair?
They would probably review the treatment plan to determine if that was still the same goals that the parents wanted. We do person-centered treatment. So instead of us choosing the goals that we think are pertinent, the family chooses the goals that they want and what they would like to achieve with the service. So they would review goals and see if anything had changed per the family's needs and what they would like to get from it.
Okay. Did you find both parties to be cooperative and engaged in the process?
Both parties participated in treatment. I had weekly visits with Ellie's mom. With Scott, it was a lot of sporadic involvement. So we would meet at times. Other times there would be several weeks where I did not hear from him. Our treatment plan was effective at the end of December, and then I had vacation over Christmas. So we resumed services January 5th, which is when we really started the actual counseling portion of it, following, establishing all the initial things. And from that point on, it was, I believe we had 10 sessions scheduled, and he attended 5 of those sessions. And that was the ones that were scheduled. There were also several weeks where maybe there would be a no-show and I didn't hear anything back for 2 or 3 weeks. And then we would have contact and set another appointment.
Okay. And so when you say 10 were scheduled, was that 10 specifically with Mr. Frid or?
Yes, 10 scheduled specifically with Mr. Frid at his home via Zoom.
Gotcha. And so of those sessions that you were able to complete, what were your observations in general? Actually, scratch that. Can you start by telling us what a session would look like?
Yeah, so I would send a Zoom link. Ellie's dad would log in for session, and he had the option to either use his phone or computer and set it up in the room so that I could view the room and the interactions. The expectation was that dad would engage with Ellie and they would be able to have some kind of interaction that I could observe and give feedback on. So initially, the idea is to establish what are the relationships, what is the home environment like, how comfortable does she feel, how does she respond to other people in the home. From there, we would talk about what can he do to help increase that engagement. That's where the parenting skills, coping skills, play activities that are age appropriate, things like that come in, and then helping to establish routines between each house that are familiar for her to help make the transitions easier.
I assume there's kind of a challenge with Zoom and young children and that type of dynamic. Is that a fair statement?
It can be. I have seen some families do better and some not, just depending on the family dynamic. With the in-person restrictions that we had, I don't know that there would have been a huge difference, as the goal is to still observe the interactions with the family and not be the one directly playing with Ellie, but having her family members play with her, and for me to be able to provide feedback. So whether that was over Zoom or in person viewing those interactions, I was still able to view the interactions and give feedback and suggestions on things that they could incorporate.
So if I understand you correctly, whether it had been in person or via Zoom, you were able to get it like an apples to apples comparison. If that makes sense.
Yes, I was able to observe the interactions. I may have been able to see better in home if they were moving from room to room, but I still had the ability to observe the interactions over Zoom.
Okay. So what were your observations of the interactions between Mr. Frid and Ellie?
Ellie was very standoffish. So there were some days where she would want to be near him and she would come and sit by him or come up and give him hugs and want to play. But there were times where, like, if her siblings were present and they would come near him while she would just walk away. She didn't want any part of it. And then she would choose to play alone. There were some sessions where she would play for a few minutes with him. Then she would get quiet, get her shoes and say, I want to go to mom's. And then it would be, working on trying to redirect her to stay without furthering a tantrum. Sometimes she was completely disengaged. She would just play on her own. And if anybody approached her or asked her to play, she would yell no and refuse to have interactions with others, or she would just sit there quietly and not say anything at all.
Did you see anything of concern, or did it mostly, in your opinion, seem to be attributable just to the environment and Ellie's personality, maybe?
I didn't see any cause for concern with abuse or anything along those lines of safety. emotionally, she seemed to have a very hard time adjusting to the environment. Now, I can't say as to whether that's just because the two homes are so different and the parenting styles are so different that could be hard for her to adjust to. Based on what I witnessed, she did have a hard time being there and just having other people around and sharing the parent attention.
Any other observations that you made during those sessions that you hadn't already covered?
When I observed her visits with mom at that house, she was much more interactive with her mom. She would bring her toys. She would want to play with her. She would dress up and dance around and was like very active, much more vocal and animated in her play. At dad's, she would isolate more. Sometimes she would play with others, but it was very brief, like maybe a few minutes, and then she would go off and do something on her own. I would see her a few times come up and sit by her dad or give him a hug and then get up and leave again. But it wasn't the same level of engagement that I saw when she was at her mom's house.
You definitely observed a bond between both parents and Ellie.
I did observe a bond. Yeah, there were differences in her behavior between homes with the amount of involvement that she had with people and her willingness to talk and engage with other people. But I did see her show affection for dad, and I didn't ever see any reason for concern about her like coming to him to hug him, or like she never showed any fear of him.
If you were able to observe or even able to draw a conclusion, did you have any concerns with Ellie's age appropriate socialization or interpersonal skills to what you could?
You mean in dad's home or in general?
In general, did she seem like a overly introverted child or a child that couldn't socialize, if you're able to draw that conclusion?
I really am not able to draw that conclusion because I only observed her with her sister and brothers on a few occasions at dad's home, and at her mom's home, it was only her and mom and not other children. So I can't speak to how she engages with other kids as a whole outside of dad's house.
Okay, fair enough. Did you feel like you had made some progress, or that Mr. Frid was receptive to any tools per se?
I don't feel like we made progress. In almost every session, we had 5 sessions together. In almost every session, there was a gap in between service where there were cancellations or no contact for a few weeks. So each time we spent some time discussing the importance of consistency in service, re-engaging, what the expectations were to participate in infant mental health counseling, in the attendance policy, things of that sort. On several occasions, Mr. Frid did indicate that he didn't think that Zoom was useful, but if I wasn't able to like interact and play with Ellie at his home, he didn't really think that would be useful either. So he did express he did not think this was a service that was useful for them. He did state that when the other children are with him and he's watching all of the kids, it's very challenging for him to participate in counseling when all of the kids need his attention and he can't give the attention to the sessions.
Do you believe that you can address these families' needs if both parents are consistent with sessions and they were to re-engage?
Yes. If they were to re-engage, they would be assigned a different counselor, as my job has changed now. They would still get infant mental health counseling. It would just be with a different counselor. But I do believe that the initial treatment goals that we established are things that they could work on and that Eleanor could benefit from participating in.
Okay. And Mr. Frid provided some testimony that the sessions had ended. Where does treatment stand at this time?
At this time, Ellie's case has been closed. Her discharge has been processed through Lifeways. So if they were to want to resume service, they would just need to go through Lifeways to do a brief screen, and then they would send a new referral to reopen services. Our assessments are good for 1 year, so they would not need to complete a new assessment. They would just need to do the brief screen to get referred to restart service.
Okay. And what was the reason for Ellie's discharge?
The visitation times had changed at her dad's home. So we had been meeting on Wednesdays when she was there during the day. At the time that they moved back to Tuesday, Thursday evenings from 5 to 8 p.m., Mr. Frid stated that that time was not going to work for them as it was very busy. They were doing dinner, getting kids ready for bed. There was a lot of things going on that wouldn't permit them to be able to do counseling during that time. I did offer to come to the home to provide, evening sessions or to meet at other times if they could work out some other time that they wanted to do it. But he stated that it just was not going to work out with the time that she was with him. So that he chose to close at that time because there was not a good time for him to meet.
Okay. So it wasn't due to your schedule, is that correct?
No, I did offer evening visits as well as daytime visits, depending on what they could work out. And I did offer to come to the home.
Okay. And moving forward, it sounds like actual in-home has started back up. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if they were to re-engage, someone would be coming to their home and there wouldn't be a necessity, or it wouldn't be necessary to transport. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Any other observations or thoughts that you think the court should be aware of from your perspective?
Yeah, so I do think that it would benefit Eleanor to continue in this type of counseling to build that rapport and attachment. From the sessions that we had when she was at her dad's home, he did report that she would be able to get through sometimes one overnight, and by the second day she was crying, she was asking to go back to her mom's, she would shut down. So the goal was to get her to full weekends. We had not done that yet during the course of the treatment because she would shut down usually by the time she completed one overnight. On the second day, she would start to have issues and she would want to leave. So rather than trying to further upset her, they would let her return to her mom's. I do think that pushing the overnights at this point is a challenge for her. I can't speak to how she's doing now, as the last session that I had with Dad was March 24th. So I don't know what the current status is, but the initial treatment goals we established were not achieved when we closed. And from my understanding of the last conversations with each parent, she was still having some challenges in adjusting. She would show some progress for a few weeks, and then she would regress again, which would put her right back to kind of the starting point of where we were at. So from my last conversations with them, that is still where she was at.
Thank you. That was helpful. I appreciate it, Mrs. Schwartz. I have no further questions at this time, but Mr. Navarre may have a couple for you. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Navarre.
I have no questions of the witness. Thank you, Amy, for your testimony today.
So I have a question. Is your counseling service ever made available on a Saturday?
We can do Saturdays if the family specifically requests it. So typically we do Monday through Friday, but we can make exceptions if need be based on the family schedule. So moving forward, that would be a possibility.
The reason I ask that is because not only you, but even the parents have identified that at times Ellie does okay with one overnight, but the next day getting her to stay for the second overnight is the challenge. So it would seem to me the service might be of the most benefit at the times when she's demonstrating the most stress.
Yeah.
Council, any follow-up questions based on mine?
No, Your Honor, thank you.
No, Your Honor, thank you.
Any reason this witness couldn't be excused?
No, Your Honor.
No, thank you, Ms. Schwartz.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schwartz. You're free to leave. And Ms. McCluskey, I'm assuming at this point you wish to question Ms. Goodwin.
That would be my only remaining witness. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Goodwin, you understand that you're still under oath?
I do.
Go ahead, Ms. McCluskey.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Goodwin, Mr. Navarre did a good job direct examining, so he covered a lot of topics I would have, so I'll try not to be redundant. We did get, obviously you testified to some of Ellie's medical needs. Can you just reiterate briefly what those were at the time Ellie was born?
So Ellie was born 12 weeks premature and spent her first 59 days of life in a NICU. So when she came home, I mean, obviously with a preemie, there's especially a preemie that was born extremely premature, you generally have lots of things that kind of pop up. She had a PDA, a small hole in her heart, which is not uncommon of premature babies. It's something that generally closes with full-term children, but with premature babies, it generally sometimes can be difficult. They had gotten that smaller before she left the NICU, but that had reopened. So she had to have that surgically repaired in June of 19 and follows up with cardio yearly for that, just to ensure everything is in place and holding well. When she was 3 months old, she had her first UTI, and it was a pretty bad one. It was at that point that U of M, her pediatrician suggested that we go to U of M and see a urologist, and they performed a VCUG where they filled her bladder with dye to see if she has backflow up there into the kidneys. It was at that point that she did have backflow on both sides, and they put her on a daily antibiotic. And she was on that for quite a while. One side resolved on its own, and the other side they surgically repaired in August of 19. After the surgical repair, that popped, the side that had resolved on its own had reopened. At the time of the surgery, we had discontinued antibiotics per urologist's suggestion. She got another UTI, a pretty bad one that they were pretty concerned December of last year, and put her back on antibiotic. But thankfully, she had a VCUG last month, and both sides have now resolved, and we should not have that issue going forward, but they will meet with her yearly to check her kidneys, make sure everything is still good. She has been with Kellogg's eyes. She's seen them for her eyes since she was under a year old. Her pediatrician made an observation that her eyes bounced quite often. So we went to Kellogg's, and it was at that point they said that she had a congenital nystagmus. So we continually monitor that. There isn't particularly anything that can be done at this time, but if it was to get severely worse, we could do surgery, but they're not implying that. That's probably something that'd be much farther down the road, possibly eyeglasses. Her balance is very poor, which is not uncommon of children with nystagmus. She has poor depth perception. which again is not uncommon of children with a nystagmus. But so we just keep following up with that every 6 months. She has been assessed. She's been with the neonatology clinic for development since she was born. Just recently graduated out of that program, and they are letting Jackson County ISD kind of take the ball from there since we're entering into school age. They would monitor her development and just kind of make sure there wasn't anything of big concern given how early she was born. She used to have early on education. I enrolled her in that when she was 4 months old with Jackson County. They'd come to the home once a month, make sure, we check off, make sure we're developing. They would assess any needs that she might have. She graduated out of that program when she was 3, which is the typical age. Ellie has a delay in mixed delay in expressive and receptive language. So when we first kind of started noticing it, it was around COVID time and everything was shut down. So once that opened back up, got her assessed, and she started services with comprehensive speech in August of last year. And it was at the time that I also had her assessed through Lyle Torrent at the end of last year, I believe November time, maybe it was October. I'd have to pull my records to know the exact day. But had her assessed as well, just for more developmental things, and also to kind of get her on board for her future education because they are tied in with Jackson County ISD. It was at that point that they suggested we could add on the ISD for additional speech services. And so we did that. And that's when she started with Aaron Krieger. She's had a Bailey's assessment with U of M, which is it was ordered by the neonatology clinic, which is something that they do for all preemies. So she had performed that. She has her allergies. When she was, I think it was about March, April of 18, she started presenting with some eczema. And it was at that point that her pediatrician was concerned that we might be looking at an allergy in her future, just because it's generally a first sign. And so they, switched her to a formula that was for milk allergy kiddos, and she started that. And it also helped. Ellie had really bad reflux. She had to take a medication for reflux for goodness, I think, until 2019. So that helped with that. It was in February of 19 that she officially got checked for allergies at U of M. And they, had said that she was allergic to the milk, the egg, peanut, and tree nuts. And she was very high on the scale for her allergy, very serious. They were expecting she would have a very serious reaction. So has carried an EpiPen since then. They are hopeful that she will grow out of the milk and the egg. Her numbers are starting to trend down. She's still very, very much allergic, could still have a very nasty reaction, but they are at least showing some promise that they might go away. And as for peanuts, that's kind of up in the air, but she might join a trial just recently approved by the FDA when she's 4. Something Scott and I discussed, but we won't make an actual decision on that until later. And they might try to kind of essentially work out the peanut allergy out of her, I guess. But we'll learn more about that as she gets older. Other than that, she had some plagocephaly when she was small, but we worked that out with physical therapy. But that's about the gist of it.
I'm sorry, what was that last one, ma'am? I missed that you worked out with physical therapy.
Plegocephaly is where it's often common in NICU kids because they spend so much time laying in a incubator. But it's where the skull, the head is kind of misshapen, and that's where you would often see a child that might need to wear a helmet. And she was fitted for helmets and seen them regularly in the beginning or around summertime-ish of 2018. But we got her into physical therapy in hopes of kind of reshaping it on our own without making her have to wear a helmet. And thankfully, we were able to do that.
Thank you.
So obviously fair to say she's got quite an extensive medical history, and there is it a fair statement that she still has some issues that need to be managed on a weekly basis?
Yeah, I mean, when she was younger, there was obviously far more doctor's appointments. She was seeing people more regularly. As she's gotten older, we are thankfully getting to the point where we're seeing providers once a year, aside from some of the others. And I think I forgot audiology, for hearing, but she's now to a yearly visit for that. So, I mean, it has gotten where there's less. I think the therapies, the speech therapies are more involved now. And then when we had Amy, we had that weekly, and that kind of stuff seems to take more time right now, or is more involved right now. Whereas a lot of her U of M appointments, and these providers, she's been with all of these providers since she was very little, under a year old. I mean, cardio's followed her since birth, urology since she was 3 months old, eyes since, the summer of 18. I mean, all of these providers have been regular people.
Okay. And obviously we are aware that her pediatrician has been with her since birth, correct?
Yes. That office was recommended to us by U of M. That was why we went there. They actually had recommended Timothy Van Scoik, but when we made our first appointment, they had told Scott and I that Van Scoik might be retiring, and we met with Leanne Van Wagenen first. Okay. And it was at that point that we decided to stay with her.
Okay. And so tell us, or tell the court about why you chose not to change Ellie's pediatrician.
I didn't change her pediatrician because Van Wagenen, Dr. Van Wagenen, she knows her. She knows her history. When I call her and say, Ellie's running a fever, I'm concerned about a UTI, although that's not an issue presently, she would know. It's very likely Ellie could have a UTI. Ellie loves her. The office loves her. She loves going to her doctor, which, in my opinion, you want that with your kid, especially, I know she does it, she sees the pediatrician more regularly now, but any kind of positive feeling towards a provider when you have a child that has to see them all the time, I think is good. But bottom line, she knows my daughter. She knows that Ellie throws a curveball sometimes with her medical, and I trust her. I trust she knows what she's doing. And I want to have trust in the people that are going to be providing care for my child.
Understand. And so you do carry health insurance on Ellie now as well?
I do.
When did that
Scott informed me in July. I don't remember the day that it had canceled. His had. And so I picked up, I've had Medicaid for her.
Let me just clarify dates real quickly. So you mean July of 2020?
Yes, that's when I added her on.
Okay, go ahead. Finish. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, she got on Medicaid when she was in the NICU. A social worker had informed us that she could qualify. And Scott and I were stunned because we made far too much money in our opinion, and we did. But they said that, given the state of Michigan, if the child spends more than 30 days in a hospital, you automatically qualify. So we added it on as a secondary, knowing that we have a premature child, and the medical bills that will come is going to be probably pretty great. So, and I kept that going and have been able to. I'm not sure how long I will be able to keep it. I'm expecting at some point I'm going to knock out financially and make too much, and will not qualify. And I almost got knocked out last year, I thought, but because of COVID, they weren't canceling anybody, and so I'm not sure if I'll be reinstated again at the next time. So I didn't want to run into that issue, and I didn't want to lose her pediatrician. That was the main thing for me, but I know that Medicaid is not a permanent thing.
Okay. And so, I'm sorry, I may have interrupted you. When you said Mr. Frid indicated that his insurance coverage had ended last July?
Yes.
Okay. And at that time you had to secure.
I had been asking him because I knew he wasn't working. And so I kept expecting his employer to turn off his health insurance because that's what we would do in our company. And so I kept expecting it to fall off, and it wasn't until I think sometime within the first week of July, maybe it was the second, that he told me that he received a notice that they had canceled it as of July 1. And so I quickly got with my employer to add Ellie on.
Okay. And that is that a cost to you, that health insurance?
Yes.
What is that cost?
I don't know the exact figure. I think it's around $230 a month.
Okay.
It might be
Mr.
$1
Frid,
more or $1 less.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So have you provided a list of providers, medical providers that Ellie sees to Mr. Frid?
I have not. I'm sure he might have asked me in 2018. I'm not going to say he didn't. I don't think I provided him one in 2018. And he has not asked for one since then, but she's also been with all of the same people since then for the most part. So
Okay.
I guess I always assumed he could call Moss, but.
Okay. And so she's been with the same providers since the time that you and Mr. Frid were still married. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, cardio, some of her stuff might have been added on from the time I moved out to the end of till the divorce was finalized. But really, in regards to urology and cardio and, all of those are all the same. And her allergist, she's been with her allergist since February of 19. And he's never gone to one. So, there's a lot of instances like that. So I just, honestly, I assumed that it wasn't needed.
Yeah, I'll get to that. So are you willing to give him a list of providers that Ellie sees at this time and their contact info?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So the Google Calendar, Mr. Frid mentioned that sometimes appointments will pop up and he doesn't know about them until the day before. Can you kind of explain briefly how you plug stuff in and how that's managed?
I generally put the appointment in when it's made. He had made a comment to me that I'm sure it was probably in 19 that he thought that it didn't pop up until a few minutes beforehand. And I said, my response was, well, why don't you just check it occasionally, just to make sure there's something in there. And that he didn't feel that was something he should have to do. But I now set it so, at least on my end, I try to set it so it'll give him a 2-week notification. I was always under the impression that when you invite someone, because I always invite him, when I put the appointment into the calendar, it asks you if you'd like to invite another party. I always invite him and add his email in. So with my personal experience with Google Calendar, generally if you invite someone, it sends an email that moment, letting you know that you've been invited to a meeting, and it asks you whether you're going to attend or not. Not that I require he answer that at that time, but so I was always under the impression that it would email him.
So if I'm understanding correctly, it sounds like he can still log into that calendar and see everything regardless of whether a notification happened to not go through.
Yeah, he can log in whenever.
Okay. So Mr. Frid's past involvement with the medical appointments, was he present? And I'm starting from Ellie's birth, and just in general, not in detail. How involved was he with those appointments?
Generally not. Before I left, I handled it. And before I moved out of the home, I handled it. When we split, I had it court ordered that he participate for overnights, and he did participate until he got his overnight, and then he started phasing out. In 2019, he did very, very little. And in 2020, it was pretty much one parent. So,
okay. Sorry to interrupt. Sometimes I ask a follow-up. So when you say court ordered, are you referring to a temporary custody order during the divorce?
Yeah, it was made in July of 18. He wanted overnights, and I was concerned, given how young she was, and her medical. I just wanted to ensure that he knew what was going on and understood what was going on if he was going to be taking her overnight. And so with friend of the court, we mediated that.
Okay. And you stated that he stopped doing those appointments after he graduated to those overnights. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to move on to the nanny. Obviously, Mr. Fridge requesting that she be discharged and he provide all of the daycare. Can you give the court a little background on when the nanny became involved and what her interactions with Ellie look like?
So I hired the nanny after a conversation with our pediatrician. I was explaining Ellie had gotten ringworms from the daycare that she had currently been at. It was an in-home daycare. And then she had gotten really sick in the beginning of June. And I had a conversation with her pediatrician about concern about her immunity. And she had said, that, yeah, no, definitely a nanny would be better for a child like Ellie, because everybody knows that daycares generally kids are sick. And so it would be less opportunities for Ellie to get sick. And when you have a child as premature as Ellie, any cold that a child gets, it sets them back a little bit because they're not really doing what they should be doing in that time because they're sick. So I asked Scott about the nanny. He said, fine, that's great. I asked him if he'd like to meet her before I hired her. He said yes. And but when I asked if he would financially contribute, he was no longer interested in meeting her. So I had got a referral from a friend who knew Tori. It was actually the best man in Scott and I's wedding referred her. And I met her and loved her. So hired her in 2018. And Ellie has been like family to Tori since. And when we got the diagnosis of all of the allergies in February, at that point, Ellie was established with Tori. Tori was fantastically loving towards my daughter, took care of all of her needs. And I see no reason to put Ellie at a potential risk of all of the allergies and being exposed in a traditional daycare. that I kept Tori on, and have since then. Ellie loves Tori. She's excited for when Tori is coming to play with her and coming over. We've gone over to Tori's house for dinner. Tori and her husband have picked Ellie up before to take her to church. Tori has gone to doctor's appointments before, not as a paid nanny, but as someone who just wants to be there, and as someone that wants to know what is going on with Ellie so that she herself can provide the best care possible. I don't know what more positive things to say about her.
And so it sounds like there was some time that Tori was off. Can you confirm? So last year, did Tori miss any working months?
Yeah, she was gone for 5 weeks in total during COVID, and for April, and then she was back. I think it was the second week of May. I think is when I brought her back, and then this year she had a calf procedure planned for the first week of January. Tori suffered a heart attack many years ago, so cardiologist follows up with her, and they had wanted to do a calf procedure the first week of January. She was supposed to be out for 2 days, and then that was going to be it. But then they said that she needed a triple bypass. So it was at that point that they scheduled that appointment a few weeks away from that time. And Tori had the triple bypass in the end of January. And she did not come back until the beginning of May of this year.
Okay, so that extended
from recovery from a triple bypass.
Okay. So that extended time was somewhat unexpected. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, no, it wasn't expected at all for myself. Well, certainly not the nanny. But we kept in communication with her throughout. We go see her, talk to her.
Okay. And so is she back to work at this time?
She is.
Okay. And would you would agree that the months where the nanny wasn't working, Mr. Frid probably doesn't owe the portion of childcare for that. Is that correct?
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I agree. He doesn't owe anything.
Okay. Now, there was some testimony regarding those payments. Has he consistently complied with that order and paid that $250 toward the nanny's fees?
No, he paid for some of the months during COVID, and then he stopped for 3 months because I don't know where the communication came or was misconstrued between himself and myself, but he was under the impression that I did not have the nanny for 3 months, and that was not accurate. And so he decided that he just wouldn't pay me for 3 months. He didn't tell me he wasn't going to do that. He just stopped. And it was in September of last year that he sent a payment for $250, and I asked him, were you going to pay the rest? And it was at that point he told me he felt it wasn't owed to me. And then that was the last payment I received.
So the last payment received was in September of 2020. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So moving on to parenting time, it sounds like, so obviously Mr. Frid is currently awarded each Tuesday and Thursday from 5 to 8, is that correct?
Yes.
And then alternate weekends.
Yes.
Okay. So it sounds like the two of you came to an agreement to modify that a little bit not too long ago. Can you explain that decision to the court?
Yes, we started doing earlier in the day right after COVID for a brief period. And there was a few times that Scott had given me very little notice that he wasn't coming to get Ellie in. And so I took it back to the court time, and I believe it was July of 2020, because although my work is very flexible, if I'm anticipating her being gone, I will generally schedule things at work for that time. So to have very little notice is difficult. So I took it back to the court order time. That way it would be outside of my working hours. And it wasn't until, and we kept that time up until January of this year. We used the court scheduled time from July to January of this year, because it was Scott felt that Ellie would do better in his home if he had her during the day. I did not think the time of day particularly mattered, so I had always been disagreeant upon that. And it was the therapist, Amy Schwartz, who suggested, why don't we give it a try? And I said, okay. So we moved to Wednesday, noon to 6. I just recently changed it back to court order at the end of April because Scott withheld her overnight and refused to give her back. So it was at that point that I felt if that was going to be something that might continue, I would have liked to have had it on court time. Court order time, I should say.
So did you believe, until whatever issues arose, was the 12 to 6 on Wednesday working?
I mean, his parents were very regular in picking her up, so that was great. She seemed like she was doing okay. I know she had moments where she was struggling, and she would do okay for a few weeks and then start to struggle again. Again, I would have continued probably the noon to 6 until he started working or until it conflicted with school. But I kind of felt backed in a corner to go back to the court order time.
So you mentioned the issue with very little notice that he wasn't coming to get Ellie. Were there issues with exchanges and parenting time, and when did those arise, if so?
When he was working, there were times where he couldn't pick her up because he was working late or whichever, and I understand that happens. I'm not trying to say anything negative, but I mean, it was frequent. And then I believe the times that he missed before there's generally was something going on in his life that kind of made that happen. And I was concerned at that time that it was just a repeat of the pattern that was before COVID. And I couldn't continue that. So,
from your perspective and in your home and what you observe, can you explain to the court the challenges that Ellie has had with parenting time, including overnights?
Ellie often, I try to prep her and say, hey, you're going to Dad's and you're going to have so much fun and Daddy can't wait to see you, and explain to her how much he loves her. And she'd say, no, I don't want to go, or she'd cry and scream, and it became quite regular. I mean, it got better when therapy started. She's not throwing her body on the ground. When she sees her grandma and her grandpa, she's excited to see them. She loves her Nana and her Papa. So she is very excited to see them, which is fantastic. And, so before it was just, it would break her down. She would cry so hard about having to leave. And it was sad to watch. She would arch her back when we would pass her off. She would holler and scream or have difficulty being put into the car seat. And no matter how you tried to talk her down from it, she didn't want to go. And she would just be so upset.
Were her behaviors different based on who was picking her up for parenting time? Well,
she had issues with Scott before when he would pick her up. And then, because it used to always be Scott that would pick her up. And then after COVID happened, I believe he picked her up for a decent amount of time, but then his parents started picking her up. And she did fine for a little while when his parents were picking her up. but then she started struggling and wouldn't even go to them. And then Scott started doing the pickups again. And just recently, since this year, I think it's been more so where I think he's gotten her maybe 2 or 3 times this year.
Okay. Now, obviously, we've heard some testimony about the challenge with the second overnight specifically. What happens when Ellie starts to struggle and does not exercise that second night? What does that look like?
Generally, if she's going, if he from what he tells me in the past, she will, I think this has gotten better, but I believe she would have moments of not wanting to eat or play or interact, or would just want to be on her tablet or wouldn't talk. She'd be crying so incessantly that, you know, he would say snot was coming out of her nose. And I believe that's gotten better, but she is still repeatedly asking for me. And sometimes when he called the Saturday before Memorial, I could hear her in the background screaming and crying and wanting to come home. And so it's at that point that he generally will call me and have me come get her. For most of this year, we just planned on one overnight. We didn't even attempt to, because she was struggling.
Okay.
And I think he only did a handful of a full weekend with 2 overnights last year. And this year, I think he's done 3 and I know that the last weekend he had her, she struggled on that Saturday too, and I picked her up early on Sunday because she was struggling again on Sunday.
Okay. When you do have to pick Ellie up early, is that at Mr. Frid's request?
Yes. I mean, I'm always more than willing to come get her. I'm never, ever going to say, no, you must keep her. If my daughter is struggling and he feels she's struggling at a point that she, you know, cannot stay, or he cannot calm her down, I'm never going to not come get her. I'm never going to say, figure it out, because I know that she shuts down, and she's been diagnosed with having a trauma. So you don't want to make it worse. You know, you don't want to add to that by my not coming to get her.
So the missed parenting time during COVID, was that per your agreement with Mr. Frid?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
I'm sorry. So the missed parenting time during COVID at the beginning of the pandemic, was that per your agreement with Mr. Frid, or was that your decision?
It was per the agreement. Are you talking about the makeup time?
Well, no, when Mr. Frid missed parenting time, I believe the testimony was that there were like 2 months that he missed his parenting time.
Yeah, I think it was a little closer to 3 months, but yes, I agreed to that. I mean, it was a scary time. We didn't know what COVID was going to do. I can keep her a lot safer virus-wise here. They generally, I mean, they had kids going to daycare, so there was lots of colds. There's generally lots of colds in that house. His current wife worked in a nursing home. So I work from home. You know, we could just hunker her down, and given her past medical history, it seemed like the right choice at the time.
Okay,
to try to protect her.
So that pause in parenting time was either per Mr. Frid's request or per agreement between the two of you?
I believe it was an agreement between the two of us.
Okay. And how many overnights did he miss during that time?
He missed 10.
Okay. So Mr. Frid raised the issue of transportation in his motion. Have there been any issues with third parties transporting for parenting time?
Yeah, that originally, I believe, was raised because he often would like to start a conversation about Ellie, and sometimes that would get heated because we don't agree. And so I had started having a third party do the handoff. I was always home when someone came to pick her up. I would either be in the doorway or watching, from a window, but I'm home and someone else would walk her out to him. And then when I would go to pick her up, I would be in the car, but someone else would walk out to get her. Generally, my mother would get out to get her. I have since stopped that. I mean, on occasion, if I feel like it's going to be a high conflict pickup because he's unhappy with me, I will utilize that for the time being. As for his pickups, he generally has someone else do the pickup. For a long time, he had the current wife would walk her out to me. He's recently started walking her back out to me. I know on Memorial, Ellie was having a hard time. I was in the middle of something and I offered for Ruth Fritz, the gal I live with, to come pick her up, and he denied me that right. He does not like Ruth. So he would not allow that to happen. He just said he would keep her. So I just left what I was doing and went and got her because I knew that Ellie was struggling.
And so obviously the current order does not restrict third parties from doing the exchanges, and you'd like that to stay in place, the ability to have third parties to insulate conflict. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. And so just a few more questions and we'll wrap up. So socialization, obviously, does Ellie socialize with other young children, even though she's home in the home during the day?
Yes, she does. There's a 3-year-old that she sees quite regularly. She actually sees her every day, 1 week on and 1 week off, because her father has 50-50. It's Ruth's eldest son. And then I have a friend who has two soon-to-be fully adopted children that she plays with. They are the ages of 6 and 9. And then I have a friend who sometimes she would watch her on occasion if I needed her quickly. And she's got 3 children, and they range. I think the youngest is maybe 5 now, but the oldest I think is 10. Then she has her cousins, Jackson and Colton, and they Jackson is 5. Sorry, 5. He and Colton is 9, and she sees all these children quite regularly. She always sees, and then not to mention the children she sees at her dad's home.
Okay. Have you ever been concerned with her ability to interact with those children?
No, never. Ellie, even if she's 3, so we're just now really reaching the age where children aren't, as providers have told me, parallel playing. So before a certain age, children play side by side more so together. And now she's reaching an age where, they're dressing up in dress-up clothes, and one person's a princess and the other one's a monster, or they're making things. She's always kind of engaging, and she'll have moments where she'll trail off, but she's always watching what they're doing. She's always, interested in what they're doing and whether she wants to jump in. I think I had said that, we had started doing one of her speech therapies at a park the last 3 weeks. And the first thing she does when we get to the park, because there's children there, of course, and the first thing she does when we get there is run to a child. She doesn't know this child, but she runs to a child and wants to run with them and play with them and interact with them. In fact, last Friday, she was upset because some older children could handle the equipment far better than her and was much faster than her because she's 3 and these children look to be about 10. And she thought that they didn't like her. She said, they don't like me, because she wanted to keep up with them. And she just didn't have the physical ability. But I've never seen her not interested in people or children or or wanting to fully unengage.
So
And
Ms.
Mr. Fritz-
Ms. McCluskey, we need to stop now. Can everyone be back at 1:30?
Sure.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, we'll see you then. Thank you. We'll see you later, ma'am.
Get out of here.